The village rested where the red earth met tall grass, shaped by time more than hands. No one knew exactly how old it was. Elders spoke of ancestors who had lived and died there long before names were recorded. Children were born, grew old, and were buried in the same soil. The land did not change much, but the people did. And still the village listened. Life moved slowly there. Morning came with the sound of pestles striking grain. Smoke rose gently from cooking fires. Goats wandered freely, knowing which homes would offer food. In the evenings, voices gathered beneath ancient trees, where stories passed from one generation to the next like breath. Yet beneath this simple rhythm lived something unseen. The village followed rules that were never written down. Rules taught through silence, through gesture, through memory. You did not whistle at night. You did not speak carelessly near sacred ground. You did not mock what you did not understand. These were not rules of fear but of respect. At the edge of the village stood the shrine. It was easy to miss if you were not looking for it. No bright colors marked its place. No walls separated it from the earth. Stones arranged by hands long gone formed its base, and old wood stood upright, darkened by rain and years. Leaves gathered around it, undisturbed. The air there felt heavier, as if it carried weight invisible to the eye. The shrine was not a place of terror. It was a place of remembrance. People came quietly. Some brought offerings. Others brought silence. Elders came to speak the names of those who had walked before them. Mothers came to ask for strength. Fathers came when they felt lost. No one shouted there. No one laughed. They believed the ancestors were not gone. They believed the ancestors watched. The elders taught that the ancestors did not interfere often. They did not punish quickly. They observed. They waited. They listened to words spoken in pride and actions taken without thought. They remembered disrespect just as clearly as they remembered devotion. Stories whispered at night told of times when the village forgot this truth. Of men who laughed at warnings and women who broke sacred promises. Of people who believed progress had erased the past. Those stories always ended the same way, with loss, with regret, with names fading from memory. The land remembered what people tried to forget. The wind carried more than dust through the grass. Sometimes it paused where it should have passed. Sometimes it whispered without sound. At night, silence pressed close, thick and aware, as if something waited for attention. Many in the village still listened. Others had begun to forget. They chased new ideas, new futures, new beliefs that promised freedom without roots. They spoke louder. They laughed more easily. They dismissed the old ways as stories meant for children. But the village itself never forgot. The ground beneath their feet held the bones of generations. The trees had watched children grow into elders. The shrine stood patient, unchanged, listening as it always had. And somewhere beyond sight the ancestors listened too. They listened to every step taken in pride. They listened to every careless word. They listened to every name spoken with mockery instead of respect. Because in this village the past was never truly past. It waited. The shrine keeper had been there longer than most people could remember. Some said he had taken the role as a young man. Others believed he had always been old. Time clung to him differently, as if it respected his purpose and moved around him instead of through him. He lived alone in a small hut not far from the shrine. The hut was simple: mud walls, a low roof, a doorway worn smooth by years of passing through it. He owned little: a sleeping mat, a cooking pot, a bundle of cloth folded neatly in the corner. He did not collect things because his life was not about keeping. It was about tending. Every morning before the sun climbed high, he walked to the shrine. His steps were slow but steady. He swept fallen leaves from the stones. He checked the wood, the markings, the small offerings left behind. He spoke the old words softly, not as commands but as greetings. He knew the names others had forgotten. The elders respected him deeply. When he passed, they nodded or touched the ground briefly in greeting. They never rushed him. They never interrupted his silence. They knew that the shrine keeper carried more than age. He carried memory. The youth, however, barely noticed him. To them, he was a quiet old man from a time they no longer believed in. They whispered jokes when his back was turned. They called him outdated. Some laughed openly, certain that the world had moved beyond such roles. The shrine keeper never reacted. He did not argue. He did not correct. He did not raise his voice. He understood that belief could not be forced and respect could not be demanded. It had to be remembered. His life was one of sacrifice, though few noticed. He did not marry. He did not travel. He did not chase wealth or status. While others slept, he kept vigil. While others celebrated, he listened. While others forgot, he remembered. When he spoke, it was rare. But when he did, people felt it. His words were not loud or poetic. They were simple, shaped by truth rather than performance. He spoke like someone who had seen consequences unfold slowly, painfully, over time. His voice carried weight not because of authority but because of patience. He never claimed power over the ancestors. In fact, he often reminded people that he held no power at all. He was only a keeper, a messenger when needed, a witness always. The ancestors do not want fear, he once said to the elders during a quiet evening gathering. They want remembrance. That was all he ever asked of the village. To remember where they came from. To remember whose blood ran through their veins. To remember that progress without roots could not stand. He did not threaten punishment. He did not predict disaster. He simply reminded people that actions echoed beyond the present moment, and that mockery wounded more deeply than ignorance. The shrine keeper knew something many had forgotten. Silence could speak louder than warning. He had seen signs before. Subtle shifts in the air. Changes in dreams. Small disturbances that others dismissed as coincidence. He understood when the ancestors were listening more closely than usual. And lately he had felt it again. A heaviness near the shrine. A pause in the wind. A tension beneath ordinary sounds. The shrine keeper said nothing yet. He continued his duties. He swept the stones. He spoke the names. He waited. Because he knew that when remembrance was mocked, the ancestors did not rush to anger. They waited. And when they finally responded, it was never without reason. The young man arrived in the village with confidence written all over him. He walked differently now. His shoulders were squared, his steps quick and certain, as if the ground itself should move aside for him. He had been away for years, far from the red earth and the slow rhythm of village life. Beyond the village, he had learned new skills, new ways of thinking, new beliefs about what mattered and what did not. To him, the village felt smaller than he remembered. He spoke of success as something earned by effort alone. He believed progress meant leaving the past behind. Education, wealth, influence, these were the things that shaped the future. Old traditions, he thought, belonged to a time of confusion and limitation. When people welcomed him back, he smiled politely but spoke quickly, already eager to show how much he had changed. He laughed at old stories. He questioned customs openly. He spoke as if certainty itself were proof of wisdom. What most people did not see was the tension beneath his confidence. His laughter was often too loud. His jokes cut too sharply. He spoke of freedom, but his eyes searched constantly for approval. Pride wrapped around him tightly, hiding an insecurity he refused to face. He noticed the shrine only in passing at first. Just a collection of stones. Just another symbol of the village's refusal to move forward. When he learned that the quiet old man tending it was called the shrine keeper, he smiled with disbelief. Soon, disbelief turned into mockery. It began casually. A laugh during conversation. A sarcastic remark about ancestors listening. A question asked loudly enough for others to hear, meant not to learn but to embarrass. He spoke as if respect were weakness and memory were chains. When the shrine keeper passed by, the young man did not lower his voice. He joked openly. He spoke of science and logic, of modern knowledge that had replaced old fears. He laughed at the idea that names spoken carelessly could carry weight. Some of the younger villagers laughed with him, unsure but eager to belong. The elders did not. They exchanged uneasy glances. Conversations fell quiet. A heaviness settled among them, the kind that came before storms. No one confronted the young man directly. They had learned that pride did not bend easily under force. The shrine keeper said nothing. He passed by as he always had, his face calm, his eyes steady. He did not look at the young man with anger. He looked at him with something else, something closer to sadness. That unsettled the young man more than any argument would have. Still he continued. Each joke grew bolder. Each remark sharper. He spoke as if the shrine were a stage for his certainty, and the shrine keeper a symbol of everything he believed he had outgrown. What he did not realize was that his words were not floating away into nothing. They were landing. The village began to feel different. Laughter faded more quickly. Evening gatherings ended earlier. The air around the shrine felt heavier, as if it held its breath. The young man felt it too, though he refused to name it. He brushed it off as superstition, as imagination shaped by old fears. He doubled down, convinced that doubt itself was weakness. Mockery to him became proof of freedom. But freedom without roots does not stand for long. And beneath his confident voice, something ancient stirred, quietly, patiently, listening as it always had. The first warning did not arrive as thunder or fire. It came softly, almost politely, as if asking to be noticed. At first it showed itself in sleep. People began waking before dawn with their hearts racing, unsure why. Dreams lingered longer than they should have, heavy with faces half-remembered and voices just out of reach. Some heard footsteps behind them in dreams, only to turn and find no one there. Others woke with the feeling that a name had been spoken, though no sound remained. They spoke of it quietly, not wanting to give shape to what they did not yet understand. During the day small things felt wrong. The wind moved strangely, circling instead of passing through. It rattled dry leaves near the shrine and then stopped, as if listening. Fires flickered without reason. A calabash fell where it had been placed securely. Goats refused to wander near certain paths. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that could be proven. But enough. The elders noticed. They had seen this pattern before, though never lightly. Signs always came gently at first, like a hand placed on the shoulder before a warning was spoken. The shrine keeper noticed too. He stood longer at the shrine in the mornings, his movements slower, more careful. He listened more than he spoke. When he finally addressed the village, his voice carried no anger, only sorrow. He spoke of balance, of memory, of the danger of laughter aimed at what had no voice to defend itself. He did not name the young man directly. He did not accuse. He reminded. Reminders were enough for those who still listened. The young man did not. He laughed at the stories of strange dreams. He mocked the idea that wind could carry meaning. He spoke loudly about coincidence and fear passed down through ignorance. When the shrine keeper's words reached him, he smiled and shook his head, as if amused by a child's mistake. Old stories, his tone suggested. Old fears. His mockery sharpened. Where before he joked, now he challenged. Where before he laughed, now he dismissed. He spoke openly about breaking free from what he called imagined chains. He treated the warnings as proof that the village needed him to lead it forward. Some laughed with him again, though fewer than before. Others fell silent. The air grew tighter, as if the village itself had drawn a slow breath and was holding it. Even the nights felt different. Sounds carried farther. Silence pressed closer. People avoided the shrine after dark, not out of fear but unease. The shrine keeper watched. He said no more. His silence was not surrender. It was restraint. Those who knew him understood that silence often meant the message had already been delivered, and what followed could not be undone by words. The young man noticed the change in atmosphere but refused to accept its meaning. He told himself that discomfort was proof of progress. That resistance always followed change. That tradition fought hardest when it was about to lose. But deep inside, a question stirred. He ignored it. One evening, as the sun sank low, the wind returned. It moved through the tall grass slowly, deliberately, and stopped near the shrine. For a long moment, nothing else moved. Not leaves. Not animals. Not voices. The wind refused silence. And in that pause, something unseen shifted, as if the village had crossed a line that could no longer be uncrossed. The warning had been given. Whether it would be heard was no longer up to the shrine keeper. The change did not happen all at once. It unfolded quietly, the way trust leaves a place, slowly, without announcement. At first, it showed itself in small moments. Conversations ended when the young man approached. Laughter softened, then disappeared altogether. Invitations stopped coming, not with explanation but with silence. He would arrive at gatherings only to find that people had already begun to drift away. No one confronted him directly. That was what unsettled him most. The elders no longer called him forward during ceremonies. When he stood before them, seeking acknowledgement or praise, their eyes passed over him as if he were no longer there. Blessings were given to others, hands laid gently on bowed heads, words spoken with care, but never for him. It felt like standing in sunlight while everyone else moved into shade. His peers grew cautious. Friends who once laughed at his jokes now avoided his gaze. They spoke to him politely, briefly, always glancing around as if afraid of being seen too close. Some still admired his confidence, but admiration did not bring comfort. It brought distance. The young man told himself it did not matter. He reminded himself of his success, his education, his plans beyond the village. He spoke louder about the future as if volume could replace connection. He smiled more often, though the smiles never reached his eyes. At night the village felt different. Sounds carried farther than they should have. Footsteps echoed behind him, though no one followed. He would pause, turn, and find only empty paths. The wind brushed past him with strange insistence, tugging at his clothes, whispering without sound. Sleep no longer came easily. When it did, it was shallow. He woke often, heart pounding, unsure why. Dreams pressed against his mind like half-remembered stories, leaving him restless and unsettled. He refused to speak of them even to himself. Admitting unease would mean admitting doubt. And doubt threatened the certainty he had built his identity upon. The shrine keeper remained silent. That silence weighed heavier than any warning had. The old man continued his duties as always, sweeping the shrine, tending the fire, speaking the names. But he no longer looked toward the young man's path. He no longer offered reminders. It felt like being dismissed by something older and wiser than anger. The young man began to feel watched. Not in a way he could describe. Not eyes in the dark. Not figures in the distance. It was the sense of being noticed by something that did not need to be seen to be present. He told himself it was imagination, guilt, fatigue. He repeated these explanations until they sounded convincing. But deep inside, a quiet fear began to grow. He found himself avoiding the shrine, taking longer paths to reach his home. When he passed near it, his steps quickened without conscious thought. His breath felt heavier there, as if the air itself resisted him. Still he refused to bow, refused to apologize, refused to admit that anything beyond his control existed. Because to admit that would mean admitting that his mockery had consequences. And consequences meant responsibility. The village did not exile him. It simply let him stand alone. And in that isolation, something ancient drew closer, not to punish but to be acknowledged. The space around him tightened, like the moment before a name is spoken. The calling did not come when the young man expected it. It did not arrive during a ceremony or near the shrine. It did not wait for darkness or silence. It came on an ordinary night, when the village lay half asleep and the world felt calm enough to be trusted. He woke suddenly, breath sharp in his chest. At first he thought he had heard someone outside his hut. He sat up, listening. The night was still. No footsteps. No voices. Only the low hum of insects and the distant rustle of grass. Then he felt it. A pressure, not on his body but on his awareness. As if the air itself had leaned closer. His name was spoken. Not aloud. Not by any human voice. It moved through him instead of toward him, filling his chest, his head, his bones. It was spoken with familiarity, with weight, with a depth that shook him awake more completely than fear ever could. He froze. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. He tried to speak, but no sound came. He tried to move, but his limbs felt distant, as if they belonged to someone else. The name came again. This time it carried images. Faces rose before him, men and women he had never met, yet somehow recognized. Their eyes held sadness, strength, patience, disappointment. He saw hands rough with labor, backs bent under years of work, feet stained red with the same earth he now stood upon. He saw paths being cleared, homes being built, children being carried. He saw sacrifice after sacrifice, small and large, woven together into a life he had inherited without asking. The visions did not rush. They unfolded slowly, deliberately, as if giving him time to understand. He saw moments of pride, moments of failure, moments when choices were made that shaped everything that followed. He felt emotions that were not his alone, grief, hope, endurance, love held quietly for generations. And then he saw himself, standing apart, laughing, turning away, mocking the very ground that had carried him. The realization struck him harder than fear. He had never been alone. Not in his success, not in his choices, not even in his defiance. The ancestors did not surround him like judges. They did not shout or accuse. Their presence was steady, heavy with meaning. It pressed against him not with anger, but with expectation. And then came the feeling that broke him open. Disappointment. Not rage. Not punishment. Disappointment. It washed through him slowly, deeply, reaching places he had never allowed himself to examine. It carried the weight of effort unrecognized, of memory dismissed, of connection denied. He understood then that his mockery had not been harmless. It had been rejection. He had rejected belonging, rejected responsibility, rejected the truth that his life was not his alone. The calling continued. He saw moments from his own life, reframed through ancestral eyes. His loud laughter now hollow. His confidence now fragile. His pride, now exposed as armor against fear. Fear of being small. Fear of being part of something larger than himself. Fear of carrying history instead of escaping it. His name was spoken once more. This time it was not a summons. It was a question. Who do you think you are without us? The pressure lifted suddenly, like a breath released after being held too long. The room returned. The sounds of night returned. He collapsed forward, gasping, sweat soaking his skin. He was awake, but nothing felt the same. The certainty he had built his life upon had cracked. The world no longer felt flat or empty of meaning. It felt layered, watched, alive. He sat there for a long time, unable to stand, unable to lie down. Every thought he had mocked now pressed against him with new weight. Every joke echoed back, stripped of humor. Every careless word felt heavier than stone. For the first time, he understood that knowledge alone did not free a person. Roots did not limit. They anchored. And without them, he had been drifting, loud and proud, toward nothing. Outside, the wind moved through the grass once more. This time it did not pause. It passed through gently, as if satisfied that it had been heard. The ancestors had spoken. They had not taken anything from him. They had returned something he did not know he had lost. His place. After the calling, the young man did not return to the world he knew. He walked through the village the next day, but everything felt distant, as if a thin wall now stood between him and the life he had been living. Faces looked familiar, yet strange. Paths he had walked since childhood felt longer, heavier, as though each step carried memory. Nothing around him had changed. Everything inside him had. The confidence that once carried him now felt brittle. His words, once sharp and quick, stayed trapped behind his teeth. When he tried to speak with certainty, his voice felt hollow, like a drum beaten without rhythm. He tried to hold on to the things that had defined him, his success, his plans, his belief that he stood apart from the past. But each time he reached for them, they slipped away, stripped of meaning. Pride no longer protected him. It exposed him. He began to notice things he had ignored before. The way elders carried silence like wisdom. The way children listened when stories were told. The way the land itself seemed to breathe, steady and patient, unmoved by human urgency. Shame settled into him slowly. Not the kind that burns hot and loud, but the kind that sits quietly, asking questions that cannot be avoided. He remembered every joke he had made at the shrine keeper's expense. Every dismissive glance. Every moment he had chosen laughter over listening. Those memories did not attack him. They waited. At night, sleep came harder than before. When it came, it brought images he could no longer escape. Faces from the calling, eyes filled with disappointment that asked him to look inward rather than away. He thought of his parents. Of stories he had brushed aside. Of sacrifices made so he could leave, learn, return with confidence that now felt undeserved. Grief surfaced where pride once lived. Not grief for loss, but grief for neglect. He realized that in trying so hard to escape the past, he had rejected the people who carried it. The shrine keeper had not represented weakness or ignorance. He had represented responsibility. Mocking him had been easier than admitting fear. Fear of belonging to something larger than himself. Fear of being accountable to more than ambition. Fear of carrying a name that came with history, not just promise. The young man felt himself breaking, not outwardly but inwardly. No tears fell. No dramatic collapse came. Instead, something steadier and more painful happened. He saw himself clearly, and he did not like what he saw. For the first time, he questioned the story he had told himself, that he had risen alone, that he owed nothing to what came before. That story crumbled under the weight of truth. He had not risen alone. He had been lifted. By hands he had never thanked. By paths cleared before he ever walked them. By names spoken long before his own. The realization crushed him more deeply than anger ever could. His pride, once loud and certain, dissolved into quiet humility. And in that quiet, a choice formed, clear and unavoidable. He could resist. He could cling to the fragments of certainty still within reach. He could dismiss the calling as imagination, the shame as weakness, the discomfort as temporary. Or he could submit. Not to fear. Not to superstition. But to remembrance. He stood at the edge of that choice for days. The village continued around him, its rhythm unchanged. The shrine keeper remained silent, his presence steady, patient. The ancestors did not speak again. They did not need to. The weight of their presence lingered, not pressing, not demanding, waiting. The young man understood then that collapse was not destruction. It was clearing. Everything false had fallen away. What remained was raw, unguarded, and real. He no longer knew who he was meant to become, but he knew who he could no longer pretend to be. At last the choice made itself. He would return. Not to defend himself. Not to explain. Not to reclaim pride. He would return stripped of certainty, carrying only sincerity. And that decision, quiet as it was, marked the true beginning of his transformation. He went to the shrine before dawn, when the village still slept and the world felt unfinished. The sky was pale, caught between night and morning, neither fully dark nor fully awake. It felt like the right moment for someone who no longer belonged to who he had been, but had not yet become who he would be. No one saw him leave his hut. He did not announce himself. He did not prepare offerings meant to impress. He carried no words carefully practiced in his mind. What he brought instead was silence, and the weight of everything he had finally understood. The shrine stood as it always had, unchanged by his absence, unmoved by his return. Stones rested where they had rested for generations. Leaves lay undisturbed. The air around it felt heavy but no longer threatening. It felt watchful. He stopped several steps away, his feet refusing to move closer at first. His chest tightened, and for a moment pride stirred again, weak but familiar. It urged him to stand tall, to justify himself, to explain his intentions. He let it pass. Slowly, deliberately he stepped forward. When he reached the edge of the shrine, he lowered himself to the ground. His knees pressed into the cool earth. His head bowed. Not in performance. Not in fear. In acknowledgement. No one was there to witness it. The shrine keeper had not arrived yet. The elders slept. The village remained unaware. This was not a public moment. There would be no praise, no forgiveness offered aloud. That was the point. He stayed there, breathing slowly, listening. He did not speak at first. He let the silence settle, let it press against him, let it strip away the last fragments of defense. When words finally formed inside him, they were not excuses. They were admissions. He acknowledged his mockery. He acknowledged his pride. He acknowledged the harm of dismissal, the weight of laughter aimed at memory. He did not ask for success or protection. He did not bargain. He accepted responsibility. The wind moved gently through the shrine, brushing past him without force. It did not circle or pause as before. It passed through, steady and calm, like breath returning to a body. Time stretched. The shrine keeper arrived quietly as he always did. His footsteps were soft, almost blending with the morning. He stopped when he saw the young man kneeling, his posture unguarded, his presence honest. The shrine keeper did not speak. He did not interrupt. He did not correct. He simply waited. This was not his moment to guide. This was the moment of testing, not by the shrine keeper but by the ancestors themselves. The young man felt their presence again, but it was different now. It did not press against him with disappointment. It hovered, observant, measuring not words but sincerity. Humility, he realized, was not humiliation. It was clarity. He remained kneeling long after his legs began to ache, long after discomfort rose. He did not shift or rise. Endurance, too, was part of remembrance. At last, the shrine keeper moved closer. His eyes rested on the young man not with judgment, but with understanding born of long years of witnessing similar journeys. Still he said nothing. Silence in that moment was guidance enough. The ancestors did not respond with signs or visions. No voice called out. No miracle unfolded. Instead, something quieter happened, something far more demanding. The presence around the shrine softened. Not into approval, into expectation. The young man understood then that humility was not the end of his trial. It was the beginning. Kneeling once did not erase harm. Admitting wrong did not restore balance on its own. Change would be required. Daily. Deliberate. Lasting. He rose slowly, his movements careful, his mind steady. He did not feel relieved. He felt grounded. The shrine keeper finally met his eyes. And in that shared silence, the young man sensed that judgment had passed into responsibility. Forgiveness did not arrive like relief. There was no sudden lightness in the young man's chest, no rush of comfort to reward his humility. Instead, what came was clarity, steady, unyielding, and honest. The days that followed his return to the shrine were quiet ones. The village noticed his change before he ever spoke of it. He walked differently now, slower, more aware. He no longer filled space with words meant to impress. When others spoke, he listened without preparing his response. This, more than anything, unsettled people. The elders watched him carefully. They did not rush to welcome him back into favor. They did not praise his humility or announce forgiveness. Their restraint was not punishment, it was wisdom. Forgiveness that arrives too easily teaches nothing. The shrine keeper spoke again, but only when needed. His words were few, chosen carefully, and never softened for comfort. He did not erase the past for the young man. He reminded him of it. He explained that forgiveness did not mean forgetting harm. It meant carrying memory forward with responsibility. To be forgiven was not to be freed from change. It was to be bound to it. The young man accepted this without argument. He did not seek shortcuts. He did not ask for signs of approval. He understood now that release was not something granted once. It was something earned through consistency. He began repairing what he could. Not loudly. Not publicly. He offered help where none had been asked. He apologized where apology was due, without defense or explanation. He stood aside when others were chosen, understanding that trust returned slowly. Some responded. Others did not. And he accepted both. At night, the ancestors returned, not in visions, not in voices, but in presence. The weight that once pressed now steadied him instead. It reminded him that memory was not a burden to be escaped, but a guide to be followed. Forgiveness, he learned, was not erasure. It was alignment. The village slowly shifted. Conversations resumed. Laughter returned, though quieter, more thoughtful. Elders began to acknowledge him again, not with celebration but with recognition. Balance did not snap back into place. It eased. The shrine keeper watched from a distance, his role once again quiet and steady. He did not claim credit for the young man's change. He never had. His duty had always been to keep the door open, to remembrance, to accountability, to return. The young man now understood that the ancestors had never wanted obedience. They had wanted awareness. In carrying the memory of his wrongdoing without shame or defense, he found something stronger than pride had ever given him. Integrity. And in that, release finally came, not as relief but as peace. Time moved forward as it always did. The village returned to its rhythm, steady and familiar. Children ran through the paths again. Fires burned each evening, their smoke rising gently into the sky. Stories were told beneath the old trees, passed from one voice to another, carried with care. The shrine remained at the edge of the village, unchanged. But something within the village had shifted. The man who once mocked the shrine keeper now walked with quiet respect. He did not announce his transformation. He did not speak often of ancestors or tradition. He did not preach. He listened. When elders spoke, he gave them his full attention. When children asked questions, he answered honestly, without laughter meant to belittle. When stories were told, he remembered them. He had learned that remembrance was not about living in the past. It was about carrying the past forward with care. The shrine keeper continued his duties, his presence steady, his silence purposeful. He did not need recognition. He had seen many journeys begin and end. This one he knew was ongoing. Sometimes the man stood near the shrine, not kneeling, not performing rituals, but standing quietly, aware of where he was and what it meant. He felt no fear there now. Only grounding. The ancestors did not call his name again. They did not need to. His name had been returned to its place, woven back into the long line of memory, responsibility, and belonging. He understood now that a name was not just a sound. It was a promise. A promise to remember. A promise to respect. A promise to listen. The village listened still. And so did he. Because ancestors do not seek worship. They seek remembrance.